Okay, so looking at the weighted average method, we're going to go through the steps with this problem, and we're going to use the same problem for FIFO as well. So with weighted average, the underlying concept is we don't worry about what portion was completed in a previous time period. So when we're looking at beginning inventory, we're going to treat beginning inventory as if we started it and completed it this time period or this month, and therefore we're going to accept the cost that was attached to any beginning inventory as if it occurred this month. So biggest thing with process costing is to use these templates. They are your biggest lifesaver, in my opinion, and helps just keep all the information in one location. So the first thing is we got to complete the physical flow. So we know how many units were where and when. So the first thing is we had 100 units in beginning inventory, and it tells us that we started 1,000 units. Units started and units added are the exact same thing. It just means this is new production that we began during the month. So the total to account for is 1,100. The total to account for, two areas highlighted in green, must always be the same number. So I just automatically go in and fill that green into 1,100. So I remember that these other two rows have to equal 1,100 as well. And it tells us that we completed this period 800 units. Completed and transferred out is the same thing as well. It means that 800 units are ready for sale. They've been transferred to the finished goods area. So the only thing we do not know is how many units were left in ending inventory. However, because I know that transferred out and ending inventory must always equal 1,100, I can take 1,100 less my transferred out to get that we had 300 units in ending inventory. The next step is to calculate the equivalent units. So in other words, I want to know if I had put all of my efforts together in regards to the work that I had produced during the month, what would be the equivalent of combining all those efforts to full units? So whenever you're dealing with units completed and transferred out, they have to be 100% complete in regards to materials, labor cost, and other costs. When we're doing this, we're going to be breaking it down by category of cost. So we're looking at how many units did we work on in regards to materials, how many units did we work on in regards to labor, and how many units did we work on in regards to other costs, which are typically overhead costs. However, those 300 in ending inventory, it tells us here in yellow that all materials are added at the start of the process and ending WIP is 40% complete to labor and other costs. Whenever it says materials are added at the start of the process, that means they're 100% finished. So these 300 units, we had worked on them, all 300, in regards to materials. But for labor and other costs, we only worked on 40% of them. So if I lined up 300 units that were 40% complete and I combined all of those 40% complete portions, that's the equivalent of saying I worked on 120 completed units. It's just the same concept. If I have 2 bottles of Pepsi and they're both 50% full, if I combine both of them, I have 1 full bottle of Pepsi. And then the same concept over here as well. It says they're 40% complete. So that means those 300 units is the same as saying I worked on 120 equivalent units. By doing this, I have everything on the same measurement. So it's the same theory of finding that common denominator when you were taught to add fractions in elementary school, is you need to have a common base. So now we have all units on a common base because we're looking at them as being completed fully. All right, instead of looking at 300 units that 40% complete, we're saying that's the equivalent of looking at 120 completed units. So we're comparing apples to apples. So next what I want to do is add up the total number of units I've worked on in regards to each category. So I worked on 1,100 units in regards to materials, and I worked on 920 units in regards to labor, and I also worked on 920 units in regards to other costs. The next portion is we're simply filling in the amount of money we have in this inventory. The problem tells us that the costs associated with beginning inventory, we had materials of $275. So that means we had direct materials of $275 attached to these 100 units in beginning inventory. We had $150 of labor cost attached to these 100 units here in beginning inventory. And we had $250 of other cost attached to those 100 units. And the new cost that occurred this month was $3,000 of materials. So this $3,000 was not only to finish the beginning inventory, but to also start those 1,000 units. $3,500 of labor and $7,000 of overhead costs. So altogether, I have $3,270 in material, $3,650 of labor, and $7,250. I also need to come up and sum up the rows. So from beginning inventory, we had $675, and from that was added this period, we had $13,500. So the total cost we have incurred for all the work done on these units is $14,175. This is the key number. This is the total cost that we are going to be responsible for dividing up to how much of this $14,175 was in these 800 units that we completed and transferred out, and how much of this money is in those 300 units that's left in ending inventory and that is not finished. Next up, I'm going to calculate the cost per equivalent unit. So the total amount of money I have in materials divided by the total number of units I worked on. So I have $2.98 a material cost per unit. For labor, I take my total cost divided by the total number of units I worked on for labor. I have $3.97. And then for overhead, I have the $7,250 divided by the 920 of $7.88. Finally, the goal is to calculate how much money do I have in those 800 units that we completed and transferred out, and how much money do I have left in those 300 units that's left in ending inventory. So once I have my cost per equivalent unit, otherwise really just known as cost per unit, same concept, I'm going to take the $2.98 in material and times it by the number of units that I worked on for materials. Then I'm going to take the $3.97 and times it by the number of units I worked on for labor, and the same with the $7.88 times the number of units I worked on for overhead. So if I sum those up, the total amount of product cost I have in those 800 units is $11,860.80. Now I'm going to do the same thing to calculate how much money I have in ending inventory. Once again, $2.98 of material for every unit I worked on. I worked on 300 units. I had $3.97 in every unit I worked on, and I worked on only 120 units. And then finally, I have $7.88 for every unit I worked on, and I worked on 120 units. So if I sum these up, the amount of money I have in ending inventory is $2,314.92. And if I want to check my work, the sum of this should come to $14,175, which is the total up here. Now, sometimes this number will be slightly off based on rounding. Because I was doing this in Excel, Excel took these numbers out, all of the decimals. But if you're doing it by hand for a test, you're going to have to round to 2 decimals. You don't want to have to carry it out 7 or 8 decimals. So you might be off here by a few $100s or $1,000, but it should be very close. So what do these numbers mean? These two numbers that we just calculated, they are key. This $11,680 $860.08 is known as our cost of good manufactured. So if you go back to those formulas from week 2 where we looked at raw materials, work in process, finished goods, this is how for process costing for mass production, we would calculate the cost of good manufactured. And we really wouldn't know that number till the end of the period, which most companies would probably be the end of the month. And then my ending WIP, which is otherwise known as ending inventory, all right, what I had left in, well, I don't want to say inventory, let's write ending WIP. My ending WIP balance is the $2,314.92. So this is the amount of money I have in these 300 units thus far. They're not finished. How do I know they're not finished? Because they're still setting and work in process. If they were finished, they'd be over on finished goods. So this is what I have in that amount thus far. And that wraps up weighted average.